The story of Upbuild began in a monastery. On our quest to understand ourselves more deeply, we recognize that it is our attachment to our egos, our identities, that gets in the way of being our true selves. This podcast will help you understand your ego. It will help you better understand your inner world, the motivations, insecurities, and emotions that affect your every action and relationship. Welcome to Upbuilding the Self.
Hello, welcome everyone to Upbuilding the Self. We're very excited to be here. I'm Hari Prasad and I have Michael here with me.
Hey, Hari, and hello, everyone.
We're discussing the reflection that Michael wrote from "It happened to me" to "It happened for me." And this is a piece which, as Michael was writing it, it touched me very much to see the transformation that he had experienced. In fact, even before he had written it, I could sense the inspiration that needed to come out. And witnessing that and then seeing the offering to this community, to our readers, and now hopefully also each of you listening, it gives me great excitement that this has come together. So we're going to unpack some of the key lessons. And I'm going to start with, what inspired you to write this piece in the first place, Michael?
Thank you, Hari. So for this piece, normally when I write pieces, I usually have a clear direction in mind, and I will then find stories or personal anecdotes in my life to help make the point. For this one, the process was a little different. The experience itself was so intense. And so that's really where it started. It was less about exactly the destination. I didn't exactly know where the destination was going to be, but I had an inspiration to write about this specific thing because the intensity of the experience was so high. So what the experience was and still is an experience with someone who I was always very close to, who is no longer speaking with me. He's cut me off from his life, at least in terms of communication. And I've gone through very different phases in my relationship to what's happened. So in the beginning, there was confusion, uncertainty. Why is this happening? There was a lot of trying to make it work, to reach out, to fix it. That was definitely the thing that dominated my mind share as somebody who's a go-getter and likes to solve problems and is always thinking about how to fix things. You know, how can I make this work? And so sending different messages, thinking about strategies. How long should I wait until the next time that I reach out? So that went on for a long time. But more recently, in the last few months, it's become clear that none of those strategies are going to work, at least in the short run. And so I went through this process of coming to terms with, at least for now, this is not a relationship that I'm going to be able to have, at least in terms of direct communication. And so that, even though it was extremely painful, led me to a place of getting a little bit more space between what was happening and the intensity of the experience and myself, which allowed me more time for reflection and thinking about, what did I really want out of this experience? And it took a long time and it took a lot of grappling, but eventually I came to this point of, actually what I want is to learn something from this experience. In fact, I need to learn something from this experience, or it will be a completely wasted experience. And so what that led me to was actually to really unpack some of those lessons.
Thank you. In the piece itself, you had quoted Aeschylus, who I love to quote on this exact line, that man must learn by suffering. And what I'm hearing from you is that the suffering was so intense here that you felt like okay, there's got to be something in this. There's got to be some reason why I'm experiencing this suffering, something that I haven't learned yet. And I really need to get what that is.
Yeah, it was ultimately, they say necessity is the mother of invention. Here, necessity was the mother of reflection. Because if there were other choices available to me, I don't think I would have gone down the path of reflection. But it was feeling like there was no other choice. And so this is actually the only thing I'm being called to do right now.
Yeah. And interestingly, as you described, it wasn't that there was a lesson that was kind of in your face. It was the pain that was in your face. And then the desperation was, there's got to be something here for me. There's got to be something that I can tap into, which will be good for me. It can't be just pain for no reason. So what is it that you learned from this pain of being cut off?
Before I actually got to looking at those lessons, there was a lot of blame towards the other person. There was me feeling like I'm in the right. I didn't really do that much wrong. And anything that I did do wrong is certainly, we can reconcile that by just talking it out. So there was a lot of feeling like this person had wronged me. But as we said, once I got through that, the lessons became about, well, regardless of who is right or who is wrong, there must have been something that I did that was so intense for this other person that they actually made this decision. So it wasn't necessarily about blaming myself, but really looking at the reality of what had happened and seeing the impact on the other person, which is slightly different than being super clear that I did something wrong. What I saw was how, and this is not just in relationship to him, which I think is the most powerful part of this, that this is a thread across my life in different relationships, was a tendency. There are a bunch of lessons which we can talk about. And one of the first ones was this tendency with people that I'm most close to have often a tough time, like really loving them for who they are, for being in relationship with them without having expectations and a certain amount of pressure and intensity that I put on the other person and the relationship, and a lack of acceptance that people who are very close to me often experience.
Okay, so you were seeing that you have expectations that the other person can't meet, and which is actually putting so much pressure, it's choking the relationship. And that was what you saw leading to the break.
Yeah, and it comes from, for me, when I meet strangers, I often have a freedom to be with them, to be myself, to really actually be the best version of me, because I don't feel that history. I don't need anything from them. And then there can be actually real love that just flows. Maybe it's not based on anything because I haven't had a history with this person, but it's just two people, two souls meeting, and there can be a kindness and a generosity and even a love that is there in that relationship and that connection. But for me, with people that I have a long history with, and especially people that I either unconsciously or consciously see as a reflection on me and my value in some way, there can be actions and expectations that are quite high pressured as a result of that. And what I saw through this experience was through his eyes, realizing that must have been really tough to be on the other side of that.
In relationship to people that you don't know so well, you're not as dependent on their validation. You feel freer. And in relationship with people that you're close to, there's a greater dependency, that you're a reflection on me. You have to show me my value, and I need your validation. Yeah.
I think some of it's about their validation for me, but I think a large part of it is about them being a certain way for me. I remember when I was a kid with both of my siblings, like my parents would want to get them ice cream and I would not want my sister or my brother to order the ice cream. And I mean, there were different reasons. Like I wanted them to be healthy. I didn't want my parents to spend money frivolously. Like and I would be the one who would be like in control of the situation and getting upset with people, like getting upset with my parents for doing it, getting upset with my siblings. It was just intense for everyone all around. It wasn't necessarily about their validation, but it was about them needing to be a certain way for me because they were a reflection on me. And so I'm not exactly sure what it was. Maybe you can help me unpack this, but there was a need to be in control.
This is great. And what was important about being in control of whether your sister and your brother got ice cream?
I always thought of myself as like a model for health and also spending efficiency. So we shouldn't waste money on things that are not going to help us improve and get better and move us towards the goal that I had in mind for me and it was my family. So everyone should sort of get on board with this healthy lifestyle and efficient use of funds.
And so there are identities there that I'm a healthy person, I'm an efficient, and I'm not a wasteful person. I'm very thoughtful about spending. Those are all identities. Yeah.
Those are all identities. Yeah. And my family should be also all of those things because that somehow reflects on me.
So how do those identities get validated?
At that time, as a kid, I think it was mostly about seeing what other people thought of my family and I.
Okay, great. So sometimes the validation is not coming from the people who reflect something about you, but it's coming from other people observing the people that reflect something about you.
Yeah, I think that's it. And then I think the other thing is about there's a power dynamic at play. And if other people are kind of lining up behind my desires, that means something about my influence and my ability to control the situation, which if I saw that happening, if I saw people listening to what I was saying, well, that would mean something about who I am. So that would be a direct form of receiving validation from them.
Fantastic. I mean, that's exactly what I was thinking, that in some ways you are dependent on their validation directly because of what you just said, that the way they listen to you or don't listen to you is the difference between validating your identity and not validating your identity. So, I mean, that's very powerful fodder when you can come to that realization and shift the relationship with those identities and hopefully also those relationships, if not those relationships, then other relationships that will come or that exist and which are being affected by the identities we carry. The question I have for you is, why did you come to this realization when so many other people go through this pain? I know so many people who have been cut off. I know people who spend the rest of their lives not talking to even like their own children. I mean, Anthony Hopkins is one person I just discovered. He's got no relationship with his child for decades. And this stuff is like not that uncommon.
It's a good question. And I also don't want to make it seem like I'm all the way there. There's still a lot more to go. With that being said, first of all, I think I have a strong hunger for improvement in all situations. My first reaction can be to withdraw or to make the other person wrong. But something that's been with me since I've been a little kid is like, make the most of it, use life to the fullest. I have this sort of unending thirst for growth. And so why should a challenging situation be any different? And then I think the second thing is being in this container of upbuild and receiving coaching and also being a coach and support structure for other people. It keeps me in this game of thinking about like what am I not seeing? What are the opportunities? And I've also had a sense for actually many, many years. And it often shows up in my New Year's resolutions, which I sometimes do and sometimes don't, depending on the year, of like just being kinder and nicer to people. Like that's always been, in some ways, that will forever be work that I know that I need to do. Here I had something so glaring, such an important thing that was not happening in my life that I wanted to happen in my face. And so it felt very natural to be able to translate that into a lesson that I wanted to learn.
I hear from you that first is a spirit of wanting to grow that's been with you actually since you were a child, which is amazing. And I guess that can be applied in many different directions. That could make you want to become the best basketball player in the world, or it can be applied to making you want to become the best human being that you can be. And then the other piece, which maybe influences which direction that goes in, is the Sangha we talk about, the term that means your connection, your association, the people that are in your life and therefore influencing you beyond what you see and what you know. And you mentioned Upbuild as a container that has a particular approach to growth and personal accountability and trying to realize our best self.
The other thing that happened in this situation that really opened up things was that I started to get excited about the situation because of the lessons that I was starting to learn. It created a new relationship to what had happened from, oh man, this sucks. My life sucks, or I can't believe this person did this to me, or like, I'm broken now because I have a broken relationship that's really important to me. Or there was a lot of that kind of victim mentality mode, which was both consciously and subconsciously affecting me. It was dragging me down. Like it would literally weigh on me each day, some days much more on the surface than others. But as soon as this started to happen, it was like, wait a minute, like this is actually an opportunity. There was excitement, and there started to be a new relationship to the person as well, from seeing them as like the bad guy, the person who did this against me, to seeing them as someone who was actually the sole reason why I was learning this lesson in this specific way that I was learning it.
That's incredible. Yeah. And that ties to what you also talked about in your writing, the stories that we create. So there's a story that I'm the victim and this person makes that person the perpetrator, frankly. And there's another story that I am the recipient, the beneficiary of a lesson. And that makes this person my teacher in some way, that I needed this experience. It doesn't mean like we glorify, oh, what a great teacher this person is, and we'll talk more about that. But it means that they have a role to play in my life that's actually important for me and for my benefit. So those are different stories that the mind can create, and you experience both of them. So what should we do with the stories that our mind keeps creating? I mean, it doesn't stop. It's always creating these stories about all of our situations and all the people in our lives, and especially about ourselves. At the end of the day, it all comes down to my identities and the story that I want to preserve. What should we do with these stories of the mind?
Well, the first thing is just to know that we have them. There's the famous David Foster Wallace speech about being a fish in water and how the fish never really knows that he's in water.
This is water.
This is water, yeah. And it's the same thing with our stories. They are the water that we swim in. And we might not know that these things actually exist and that there are different options, that we can either be a fish in water or we can be a bird in the sky, or there's a lot of other mediums. I don't know if I'm beating this metaphor too hard, but there's different choices for us in terms of which story we want to swim in. And it's really important that this is not about, actually, you put it this way. And when you were editing the piece, we don't want to just be in storyland, meaning like, oh yeah, this is true. This is, I'm going to go with this one, because that is not honoring the truth of the situation. So it's really important that we really see what's actually the reality and what's going on here. But one of the things that I woke up to in this situation was that the story that I'm the victim and that this person is wronging me, it was definitely no more true than this other story of there's actually a lot for me to learn here. And if I sincerely do the work of introspecting about why the relationship has gotten to the point that it's gotten to, there's a lot for me in here. And without this person, I would not have learned the lesson in the way that I'm learning it right now, right here, in this exact moment in time. And there's so much truth to that story.
So much appreciate that. Yeah. The first thing is to recognize that we live in all these stories. And the second thing is to find out which one is true or which ones are true. And in this case, in most cases, there will be truths to different stories. And then you have to evaluate, well, what's true? How much is this story true? How do we weave together the truest understanding of reality? And that's the question that I want to ask you. How do we do that? How do we know what the reality is?
Before we start talking about that, I wanted to share one more thing. In our course on the Bhagavad Gita that we are currently going through right now, and you facilitated a class last night, and one of the things you talked about was how the mind is essentially the creator of all of these stories. And the mind does not actually have our best interest at heart. And it's so important to remember that, because a lot of us think that our minds are the best things about us. Like, who would I be if I didn't have my mind? And it is true. We need our mind for many different things. It's very valuable, but it also deludes us in many ways. And somebody once told me, the mind is not your friend. Don't ever forget that the mind is not your friend. And I've always kept that in my mind, because whenever I start believing my mind too much, that's a red flag. That alarm bell should be going off, because there's probably something else going on that I'm not really seeing, or I'm not paying attention to, that I'm being tricked into believing. Just to underscore the point that just because we think it does not mean it's true or that it's beneficial for us.
Yeah, Krishna is coaching Arjuna in the conversation that is the Bhagavad Gita. And Krishna is telling Arjuna, in order to become self-realized, you have to understand these truths. And one of them is that the mind can be your best friend, can also be your worst enemy. And hint, the default is not your best friend. The default is that the ego has control over us, and that makes it the worst enemy, because it steers us away from the real self. It steers us into projections about who we think we should be in the world, to establish a secure identity that is self-serving and not in line with the beauty of the soul, of the deepest core of who we are, in connection with all others and in service to all others. So the mind has to be made, and Krishna really emphasizes this to Arjuna and to all of us, that we have to make the mind our friend. We actually have to change the dynamic. And that is not an easy thing. It is a big task. It's a lifelong journey. So making the mind the friend requires a lot of awareness around the ego identities, a lot of awareness around the functioning of the mind, which is a whole deep subject. I mean, all of these are very deep subjects in and of themselves. But you have to wade through the stories and try to come to a reality. And so again, I want to ask that question. How do we do that? How do we know what the reality is amidst all of our stories?
I think zooming out can be a really helpful tool in seeing the reality.
Me too.
Where I was for a long time was zoomed in on what's best for me and not the real me. I was thinking, like, I want this relationship. This can't be broken. I didn't do anything. And so this is how it should be. But with a little perspective, with a little zooming out, then it started to be like, well, what's best for him, or why is he doing this? And then with even more zoomed out, it was like, well, what's best for my future relationships and my own personal growth? Even zooming out more, like what's best for the world, and what does God want from me? Asking some of these like really big, deeper questions. And with that, it started to actually get closer to the truth, to be able to see what would be real and important when looking at life on a much longer time frame than what I had been previously looking at.
That is so inspiring. So also so tangible, so actionable. That kind of zooming out that you really vividly described with those questions that everyone listening can ask themselves is extremely beneficial. I mean, honestly, it's transformative if you actually consistently ask and want to know the answers. That's the key. You can't just ask the question and put it out in the ether. You have to also fearlessly want to know the answers and want to live in the reality.
It's a high bar of what we're talking. We're talking about something that's a very high bar, and it's not easy to sustain. I still go into victim mode as it relates to this specific circumstance. And even asking the questions once and getting some answers, when you feel that inspiration, or when you're doing a practice that helps you get more into that mindset, or even doing a visualization of zooming out and like, what does that look like? And then getting some answers and writing it down, or speaking it to a friend or a support structure or a coach or something, writing it in your journal, whatever it might be, that can be a great start to just open the door. And then that it can become more sustainable in the long run. There's always the opportunity in every situation, especially the most intense, challenging situations, to ask yourself, well, first of all, to remind yourself that I actually need this situation in order to grow towards my best self. And then what am I meant to learn? Or what do I need to learn from this situation in order to go in that direction?
Yeah. Thank you. So we've already been touching on this a lot, but I just want to ask you very pointedly, in case it's helpful to synthesize and in case anything new comes out, how can we genuinely see someone that causes us pain as our teacher? Because that is not an easy thing. And everybody has people in their lives that are causing them pain. And we're not seeing them as our teacher. And some of us don't want to.
Well, I think the ego doesn't like to see somebody as a teacher, because that can feel like I'm glorifying them in some way.
Yeah.
And it's just simply not true. They're a teacher because I'm learning lessons in relationship to them. And then the second thing, which we've touched on, is once I get specific about the lessons, if I'm just thinking of this person as my teacher, but I actually haven't learned anything from them yet, then I'm not going to believe that. That's just going to be a bunch of, self-help, feel-good talk, and there's going to be no teeth behind it. But as soon as I get the specifics of what I need to learn here, then it takes on a whole different meaning that will feel a lot more authentic and real.
That's great. Yeah. This can't be just like a fanciful story that, this person's my teacher. It's important that you actually have gained something that you can then attribute to the person. Otherwise, it's totally artificial. It doesn't make any sense. Yeah, it's just like another concocted strategy. So we have to actually do the work to figure out, what am I gaining from this person? And then that's not a glorification of the person, as you so importantly captured. It's not a glorification of the person. It's an honoring of the role that person is playing in my life for my benefit, whether they intended that or not. And in most cases, it's not their intention. I'm thinking also about, one of the most pivotal relationships that I experienced, which I speak about in our Excavating Your Ego Enneagram workshop. This girl that I thought I was going to marry many, many years ago, she caused me so much heartache, so much pain. I was shattered. I mean, it was like when she broke up with me, that was the worst experience of my life to that point. And it would not have been natural to think, well, look, she's so good that she caused me that pain. That's great. That would be absurd. It would be ridiculous. And it would not be honoring what I went through. But through this self work, I came to a point of genuinely being able to say, well, thank God that she played this role for me. It doesn't mean, oh, what an elevated person. She's got her own struggles and intensity and traumas and things. Like, it's not to say, oh my God, she's so elevated, but it is to say that she played a very, very key role for me. And I'm so grateful to her for that. And in fact, the crazy thing is, I feel love for her because of that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not a glorification. This is the subtle nuance. It's not a glorification of, oh, well, it's great that she did that and look at what a great person she is. But it is to say that I can find love and connection in my heart because of a role that she played, which was just for me, that I would not have been able to get to this place without having her play. And I am so genuinely so grateful to her and feel that love for her. Whether she understands that or cares about that or not, doesn't matter.
And you see how it's a beautiful, thank you for sharing that story. It's a beautiful cycle that starts to happen, because once you start to see the lessons for yourself, then the gratitude comes in, as you shared. And then the softening of this person was wrong starts to happen. And you can see that even if what they did had a wrong quality to it, that it only came because of their own suffering, because of what they had gone through, or their own attachments, which came from something that they had experienced at some point in their life, their conditioning. And once we start to see that, there can be things like empathy. And then that can even add to this feeling of gratitude. And it just becomes this very real, very concrete, self-fulfilling prophecy of more appreciation and more connection and more love, as you shared.
100%. 100%. And the thing is, the relationship is still cut. I mean, even just from a friendly or a civil standpoint, even from a civil standpoint, like at some point, I try to reconcile and just show that I want to put my best foot forward and not hold on to any grudge or negative feeling at all. And it was bewildering for her. Like, she couldn't understand at all what I was doing. She thought I was crazy. And I was being very, very sincere. And if I didn't do that, I wouldn't be where I am, where I feel so much freer. I mean, I feel completely free in this relationship. And I was locked up, like, with different side effects. It was crazy. It was so, so difficult, so torturous. And to have found that forgiveness and tried to reconcile, it was liberating. And it did not depend on the outcome. It did not depend on her outcome or her seeing me a certain way. I had freed myself from the ego identities there by some grace. So what's really important is this is not dependent on what happens in the relationship. This is about our relationship with ourselves, which then we can apply to people, even if they don't apply that to us. So to really be able to come to this point where we're forgiving and we're seeing people as our teacher. And it doesn't mean that, like, I would want to have a close friendship or that I would trust her given what I've seen. It's not the same thing.
Mhm.
But I can, as you said, empathize and also see where, I had a part to play as well. And that was a crucial part of my freeing myself, was taking responsibility for whatever I contributed. And in certain cases, you didn't contribute anything. Victims of abuse, you don't have to take that responsibility. That can be purely on the other person. So it's not to say that we always, always, always have to take that responsibility, but wherever we can, we should make ourselves uncomfortable taking responsibility, because that's going to free us and that's going to help us see reality and allow us to more genuinely experience the person as our teacher.
Beautiful. So, two things that I want to reflect back on. First of all, you use the word forgiveness, which is such a beautiful expression of what will come from that circle of empathy and gratitude that we start to feel, even if we never end up getting in touch with the person ever again. We've talked about in one of our other programs, Remembering Who We Are, how the definition of forgiveness is releasing the knot in my own heart as it relates to somebody else or a situation that's happened. And that's what we're doing here. We're not necessarily going out and forgiving the other person, but we're releasing that knot in our heart. And then the second thing that I wanted to reflect back was this framework of seeing others as our teacher and seeing life as and situations as happening for me can also be applied to people that we never actually have a relationship with, that just show up in our life in ways, and we have some reaction to that person or to that situation. And often those reactions are negative feeling. We don't like, there's some discomfort or some judgment. And the reason why we can still use this framework in those situations is because that judgment that we feel, or that negative, quote unquote, negative reaction that we have, shows us something about ourselves. There's some mirror that's being held up.
So what does it look like to live a life where everything happens for me and nothing happens to me?
It's glorious. It's hard, but there's more resilience, because when situations happen, I mean, it might not feel good, but we don't let it get us down, because we're more oriented towards what's possible coming out of this situation. We also could just get a chance to experience a lot more gratitude. And then the other thing that happens is we start feeling a lot more meaning and fulfillment in our hearts, because things aren't just happening randomly. Our other partner, Vipin, wrote a beautiful piece about his own personal journey with the expression, everything happens for a reason, and how he used to think of it as just, rationalization, people trying to feel good about things that weren't so good. And now having a much deeper understanding of what that really is all about, and seeing it as absolutely true, and connection to the divine in his relationship with that phrase. I think there's something similar here, where we start to see things as having meaning. And that is so much better than a life where we see everything without meaning.
Beautiful. It's so funny, because I was also thinking of that piece, and it has a similar structure to the title of A Journey from Rationalization to Realization in Vipin's piece, and from it happened to me to it happened for me. There's some evolution. And it's also a related point that there is a reason, there is a lesson, there's something that I can mine here that is for me, that is for me. And you mentioned that there's resilience that will come. There is meaning that will come, rather than everything being meaningless. There's a connection with other hearts and souls. And really, what could be better? It's so much. I mean, I'm thinking, if I were to rewind to the days of being cut off by this girl I thought I was going to marry. I mean, I was just in victim mode and it was miserable. It was absolutely miserable because I felt I had been so wronged. And the truth is, in many ways, I had been wronged. But in many ways, I had also caused wrong that I was not allowing myself to see. And even regardless, even if I was completely innocent and she was completely in the wrong, I was only hurting myself and stifling myself to remain in that mode of feeling like a victim. Whereas actually, there were incredible lessons that propelled me forward in my own growth journey that I absolutely needed. And it takes courage to open this stuff up and to get out of what we've been talking about. And you mentioned again now that the narrow, myopic, I, me, mine-centered mind that is driven by our egos, driven by the identities of who we think we should be, that we depend on other people to validate. There's a world outside of that. There's something which is so glorious that is oxygen for the soul. Why not allow ourselves to experience that, even amidst the pain? So is there anything that you would share in closing that you want to offer us to take away further?
My encouragement would be to do this right now, to think of one situation in your life which is intense, overarchingly, or maybe it's just the most intense thing you're experiencing this week or today, and ask yourself, what do I need to learn from this? And that's it. And see what happens. See what changes as a result of sincerely taking on that lesson that you know that you need to learn from this situation, because you know it just might involve clearing some of that ego stuff off the top before actually getting to the good stuff.
So crisp and clear and simple, but not easy. It's simple, but not easy. And those are often the best things. Yeah, I also encourage everyone to take on that challenge. It's very actionable, it's very doable, and very powerful. Thank you to everyone. And thank you so much, Michael, for sharing your own experiences, realizations, vulnerable struggles, and the incredible gains that you've made and that you're offering us.
Thank you, Hari Prasad.
Thank you for listening to Upbuilding the Self. Upbuild is a leadership development company that offers workshops, coaching, and other services to help you on the path towards being your best self, free from the shackles of the ego. To learn more about our work, visit our website, upbuild.com, and sign up for our newsletter to gain access to podcasts, reflections, and upcoming events. If you enjoyed this episode, please go to iTunes to leave us a review so that others can find and benefit from the podcast. We look forward to being with you again next time.